Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Our goal is to equip listeners to become better readers of Scripture and more skillful leaders in their local churches and ministries. If you would like to learn more about Pillar Seminary and sign up to receive exclusive content from Pillar's faculty, please visit pillarseminary.org.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Pillar Podcast. We're delighted you're here with us. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening, as always. With us today, we've got a special treat. One of our Old Testament faculty members that we are just rolling on for the fall. We have him here. We're going to let you get to know him. Kyle H. Keimer, Dr. Kyle H. Keimer. Kyle, thanks for being here, buddy.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to
What does the H stand for?
Horatio. No, Henry.
Dude, I was about to be super impressed. Oh, man. I got so excited. Okay. So, Dr. Kyle Keimer, we're delighted you're here, Kyle. Thank you for your time. Thanks for letting us get to know you and show you off to our podcast audience, among whom many of our students are. With me as well, we got Donnell Moore and Daniel Cabral. Gentlemen, thank you as well for your time. Thanks for being here. So, Donnell, you're muted. I saw you responding. We are professionals, by the way. I'll just tell you, we got birds chirping in one of our one of the windows, and who knows what else is going on.
Pillar Wonderland.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so as we were able to do with the introduction to Dr. Parker, here we're going to get to know you just a little bit. We've got some elements of your bio that we'd like to pick at and let you introduce for us, let you talk us through. And then we're going to get into as much as we can in the limited time here, your research. You're an archaeologist, you're a scholar, you're a professor. And so we just want to kind of learn a little bit about what makes you tick. And if there is time, we'll have some quick hit zany questions at the end that should be fun. But we might not get there if we nerd out along the way for too long. So,
sounds good.
Kyle, why don't we start with this? You are an archaeologist, as I said. Tell us, it feels like this is primary in your professional identity, the work that you've done, the research that you do. Give us a little bit about your archaeology love and background. How did you become an archaeologist? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, it all started when I was a little kid. I watched this amazing documentary film about archaeology. Many people may have heard of it. It's called Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it really got me coming. Yeah, it really got me going. Actually, and just growing up watching Indiana Jones movies really put this idea in my head of what archaeology. Obviously, now I know that's not what it was, but it was at the same time. And then coupled with kind of a love of the Bible and growing up in the church, I put the two together and said, "Oh, this is something that would be really interesting." I didn't actually start that, though, in college. I actually went to college to study astrophysics and did that. But it turns out I can't do math. So that didn't last all that long. You kind of need to know how to do math well to do that kind of thing. So I was like, well, let me think about something that doesn't include any math. Archaeology. There's not a whole lot of math there. So I ended up going on an excavation in my undergrad to Caesarea Maritima in Israel and just loved it. And that was kind of the beginning that caused me to switch my major, go on to graduate school, start pursuing and learning all about archaeology, and also specifically biblical archaeology. And one thing led to the next.
Man, that's cool. And so now, though, this is much more. By the way, I was thinking of Indiana Jones. So my takeaway from Indiana Jones, you could tell I'd never be an archaeologist. Mine was, don't go to the Temple of Doom and get your heart ripped out.
That is a constant worry that I have.
That's about all I remember as being traumatized by that. So it's a professional interest. Yeah. Don't do that. So give us a little bit about your archaeology since then, though. I mean, the site list of digs and stuff was it's too hard to pronounce and too many to have time to say here.
So it's been about, let's see, at this point, almost 23 years of doing excavations, most of which were in Israel at different sites. I did several seasons in Cyprus, though, which was also amazing at a site called Idalian. And that was more kind of classical period, 6th century through 1st century, basically. But the sites in Israel, I've been fortunate to excavate from very far in the north to very far in the south, covering periods from, say, the early Bronze Age or the fourth millennium, all the way up to the British Mandate period. And so, and a number of different sites have been exposed to the different types of material culture, the different individual cultures within the land as well. And it's just been, a really great experience to have such a broad exposure and to then be able to try and work it together and see how everything fits.
Okay. And this has been I guess, a lot of the focus of your teaching as well as professor of archaeology, sort of. What are the courses that you really get jazzed about getting to teach along the lines of archaeology?
Gosh, that's a good question. There's so many. I think, just introducing people to archaeology and then using it as a tool to say, here's what we can do with archaeology, here's what we can't do with archaeology as well, and helping them to discern the limits, because maybe all they do know is Indiana Jones or some other popular thing, and say, okay, this is what real archaeology is, this is what it can do, these are the limitations. But then more so, I like to see myself, though, as kind of straddling two fields, not only archaeology, but also the biblical text, the Hebrew Bible. And how does archaeology and how do the texts come together? And obviously, you've got two almost different fields. You've got to kind of learn to maneuver within both of them before you can bring them together. And that's what I've really tried to do over the course of my career.
So, I mean, I guess that's anticipating maybe where we're going to go. I'm curious, though, when you're talking about the task of showing how they engage with each other, is there like a back of the envelope, and this is how we do it? You got any kind of undergraduate level or?
I think the thing that I would always kind of drive home is that whether you're working with the archaeology or the text, both of them need to be interpreted. And that's a really important, I think, methodological step that I think many people don't necessarily think about for the archaeology. There's maybe this assumption that you dig things up and you know what it is, and then you publish it, and then you see how it relates directly to what's happening in the Bible. Well, there's a whole slew of other steps that go into that. Archaeologists don't always agree on what they've discovered and how to interpret it. There's a great level of interpretation. There are different kind of methodological and theoretical frameworks that come behind how we view what we're looking at that comes out of the ground, and also how to make sense of it and kind of understand the meaning that the original people may have had with it. And so that first step of knowing we have to interpret both corpora of data is the first step then to kind of bringing them together. And once we've done our kind of homework and looked at the archaeology, and once we've done our homework and looked at the text and kind of considered the original context, what might the original authors have been aiming for? Who was the original audience? What is the general context? What is the worldview? Then we can start to see how these things might connect. What things in the text leave an actual archaeological footprint? This is a big question. I think that also there's just a lot of assumption. Well, the things in the text are going to leave some sort of archaeological record. Many of them don't. And even when they do, we still have to interpret what it means in the archaeology, and we have to figure out what the text itself is telling us should be there. And I could give any number of different case studies where I think archaeologists in particular have either read the text too simply or just assume something, and then when they don't find it in the archaeology, they use that then to kind of denigrate the text itself. That's all kinds of methodological problems there.
Oh man, you are straddling two worlds and then bringing them together. I would imagine that's quite challenging.
Can I ask an archaeology question before we move on real quick?
Yeah, sure.
I know nothing about archaeology, so I'm just wondering, you said you've been doing it for like 20 some years. How does it work with is there always a new site to find? Does it take decades to clear one site? Is there just a never ending number of sites? Is there red tape that keeps one site from being fully explored? How does that work? With
That's a great question.
So there are in Israel, and you could say the same around the world, but obviously I'll just focus on Israel. There are thousands of sites within Israel, from single occupation sites to the mounds of artificial occupation, what we call tells, right? And these are just multiple layers of cities built one upon another, and you dig through each of these subsequent layers to kind of learn the history of occupation of a site. So there are thousands of these throughout Israel. In order to excavate one of these, you get a license from the Antiquities Authority, and then you can go off and excavate it. And then depending on how much money you have, funding is one of the big things, lets you know how much resource you have, how much time you can spend, because not only do you excavate it, but then you also need to plan ahead to publish it, because it's great and wonderful to excavate it and find out what's there. But if you don't actually let the world know or publish it in a timely manner, what good is it if you know everything there is to know about a specific site and no one else does? And so there are many archaeologists who just love playing in the dirt. I would include myself there, but then we also have to remember that we have to publish that as well. So there's a whole slew of aspects that go into doing the work. And then once you get to a site, how do you know which site you want to dig? Well, that just depends on the research question and the periods you're interested in. Say if I want to excavate a site from the Iron Age 1, right, from about 1200 to 1000 BC, you can do a survey, just a walking survey across the surface. And one thing we know is that pottery from all the different periods generally will kind of work its way to the surface, and you can get an indication of whether or not a site is occupied at a given time period just by walking across the surface and finding the pottery that's there. There are limitations to this, and it's not always 100% foolproof, but it gives you a good indication. You develop your research questions, you go to that site, and then you can open up an excavation area and start to see what's there.
So you do the research to see maybe where people lived and the like, and then you go to those sites and dig.
Yeah, you can do it that way. You can say, I'm interested in a specific period, or I'm interested in a specific kind of cultural group from the ancient world, or I'm interested in a specific region. And there's any number of different, approaches that people would take. My own personal interest right now are sites that are occupied in the Iron Age 1. I find that this is a period that's extremely fascinating because it's a transition between Egyptian dominance in the late Bronze Age and the preceding centuries to the rise of localized monarchies. Well, what happens in between? What are the changes in power? What are the changes in population? What does that mean for the social structure, the economic trade routes, all these things? There's so many interesting questions that we're getting to a point where we can ask new and interesting questions based on not only how much we excavate, but also new scientific methods that we bring to the field that are allowing us to analyze the material in a way that even a generation ago we couldn't do.
So, to all the other questions, let's just forget them because this is so fascinating. Did you say Iron 1 is 1200 to 1000 or so? Roughly, and that's your area. So are there new ideas or theories or new fresh conversations about the conquest and habitation of the land that normal people might want to know about?
Yeah. No, interestingly, no, there aren't. But this is an area where I think that we can actually go back and revisit some things. And because we are traditionally, the Iron 1 was one of these periods where we didn't have a whole lot of sites or levels from that period. And so it was a bit of a black hole, but it wasn't as clearly or as widely known as the preceding period and even the later periods. That really has changed in the last maybe 10 years even. And there was a slew of new Iron Age 1 sites that have been being excavated. And, unfortunately, I think today many archaeologists have become so specialized that they're archaeologists and they do archaeology. They don't work with the text. Or if they do, it is a very kind of surface treatment of, okay, this is what we're finding. This is maybe how it maps onto what the biblical story is saying. And, there needs to be, at least in my estimation, even greater interaction. And the same with biblical scholars who will do everything with the text critical, the historical analysis, the literary analysis. They might not know all the nuances of archaeology and what to do with it. And so they kind of pick and choose some of the features that they think help illuminate the text without having a full picture of everything that's there. And I think, again, if we get into the nitty gritty of both these types of evidence, the archaeology and the text, and how we're dealing with those, there's a lot of questions we can revisit that we can shed some light on. And I think the whole kind of conquest Israelite settlement type question is one of those big questions. It is in the back burner. There's an idea to do that exactly. I just need to have time and to get there. So
time and money. Yep. That's
so when the biblical text and the archaeological research and writing differ, what happens? What do you do?
Yeah, give us an example from maybe the
question.
early monarchy or the settlement period judges or something.
Yeah. One of the kind of classic case studies, if you will, is the case of Jericho, the archaeology of Jericho.
Yeah.
So here's a site that was excavated originally back in the early 1900s by some Germans, and then by the British, and then by the British again with Kathleen Kenyon in the 50s.
Yeah.
And one of the original excavators said, "Oh, I've discovered the city of Joshua that was then destroyed, as is recounted in the book of Joshua." And boom, everything supports the biblical text. And in those days, archaeology was being used to support the historicity of the biblical text. Then along comes Kathleen Kenyon. She excavates more widely at Jericho and says, "Yeah, there's a little bit of late Bronze Age here, which would be the time period, kind of historically speaking, of when Israel is supposed to be coming into the land." Of course, there's a whole separate question about when that was supposed to be. But she says it's very limited. There's no evidence of destruction. The site was largely unoccupied, and therefore the whole biblical portrayal really is fantastic. It doesn't make sense. It's probably written from a later period and doesn't reflect the actual historical happening. And this has become almost canon in biblical studies, even in archaeological record, that there was no late Bronze Age at Jericho. There was no destruction there. So for the Israelites to claim that there was, they clearly must have been making up a story and or looking at this ruined site as they did come into the land eventually, and they just made up a story about that to kind of tie themselves to the land. Well, in more recent times, scholars have then gone back and looked at the biblical text and said, okay, well, what does the text actually say about the destruction of Jericho? And you have the episode of Rahab and the spies, and it talks about her house kind of being in the wall of the city, and the spies get let down out of a window out of her house, and they get out of the city. And for the longest time, many scholars, archaeological and biblical, said, "What? This makes no sense. What is the text actually talking about?" But over time, we realized that actually in the late Bronze Age, one of the quintessential ways that you fortify your site is you basically build houses in a circle around the edge, and they're connected. You don't have a freestanding giant city wall that, I don't know, something, a freestanding city wall. There we go.
Yeah.
I can't even say
like
that.
we imagine from the old Bible movies. And
Exactly. What you have are a bunch of houses built around the edge of a site that have windows because they need light to come in. They want to be able to have airflow. And we see in the archaeology that actually in that late Bronze Age, this is something we see. It's not as common maybe in later periods, actually, or even in earlier periods. And so it actually fits in the late Bronze Age, some of the specific details from the text in a way that it wouldn't fit later on. Coupled with that, we actually have illustrations from Egypt from the days of Merneptah. So we're looking around 1200 BC or so. And he depicts Canaanite cities that he's kind of campaigning against and destroying. And lo and behold, he depicts windows in the walls of these cities. Yeah. And there's different discussions in Egyptian art about whether this is stylized or what it could mean. But one likely possibility is that these are just windows because that's what they encountered when they came to these cities that are surrounded by these houses, the windows there. So, when you go back then and look at the specifics in the text, you actually see correlation in the archaeological record that is there. And so you can reinterpret the text and say, well, it doesn't have to be made up. Actually, all these details fit in the time period the text says things are supposed to be happening. So, why get rid of it? Why think that it's entirely made up? Even more recently, a Palestinian and Italian excavation went back to Jericho. They did more excavations. Not only do they have late Bronze Age, an entire settlement from that time period, they also have a destruction layer from that period. And so the challenge with Jericho is that the site as a whole expands and contracts in different time periods. And so Kenyon only exposed a very small portion of where the late Bronze Age was actually kind of existent in the site. But because it wasn't kind of occupied or wasn't present in the large portion of the site, this is why she had such a negative view of it and why it became known that, there's nothing even there from the late Bronze Age. Well, actually, yes, there is an entire settlement and it was destroyed. We have a burn layer from the destruction that the Italian team has actually found. So now all of a sudden we have to come back and say, okay, biblical scholars, here's the archaeological evidence. Is this still completely made up, or what do you think now?
Yeah.
And this is where we are today. And again, this this evidence from Jericho is really quite recent. And so it'll be interesting to see how biblical scholars then take that, whether they take that, and allow that to help inform their interpretation of the historicity of the biblical text.
How crazy. Want to let you know that if you are interested in studying with us at Pillar for the fall 2024 semester, we're still accepting applications all the way up to July 29th of 2024. So you can find out more information about the application process and see the application itself at pillarseminary.org/apply. If you have any questions, email us at admissions@pillarseminary.org and we'll get all your questions answered and help you fill out that application and get it submitted. So when you say recent, do you mean last couple of years?
Yeah, there was an article that came out just this year, actually, that published the late bronze elements of Jericho and from the most recent excavations.
Hot diggity, man! That's crazy. That's a great question, Donnell. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, that's. Oh man! So that is so. It's so fascinating to me. It really does seem fun because the information is always fresh. There's always new stuff. It's a living field rather than like classical studies where, there's this body of text, and that's bizarre.
And we've really switched from using the Bible to kind of, as this was our large main corpus, and we had fewer archaeological remains of kind of using the Bible to interpret the archaeology. Now we have far more archaeological remains and materials that the pattern has kind of switched. We use those almost in some regard to interpret the biblical text. And so it should be, at least in my mind, kind of a back and forth. We find more in the archaeology, we reread the text. We reread the text, we see how we interpret the archaeology, and back and forth, and we see how it is. Sometimes there's tension, sometimes there isn't tension. There's never really a smoking gun, though, at the same time either. I mean, nothing in the archaeological record is going to say, boom, 100%, this has proven the Bible. No, it doesn't do that. And we don't need to expect it to do that. But it does give us a great clue into the worldview, the mindset, the concept, the historicity of some of the events in the text. And it does shed a lot of light. And it should make us go back and reinterpret the text and see it, because now we have new, fresh evidence in a way that no other generation before us had. They just kind of had tradition developing for generation and generation and generation. Well, we have new data. Let's see how it works in there with everything.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So let's poke our way through a few more of the lineup here. Maybe we could just skip down your podcaster. The Biblical World podcast is under, I guess, or partnered with the Biblical Mind and some other podcasts. Do you have maybe this is a good question. Do you have a podcast on this discussion? Have you talked more in depth about this yet?
We touch on it in a recent episode, and so the podcast is On Script Biblical World. We actually have a recent episode where we interview a scholar named Jeff Chadwick, who manages all the excavation results from the site of Hebron in the Hill Country. And we kind of touch on this issue of late Bronze Age and archaeological interpretation of different sites. Hebron falls in the same category that scholars for the longest time said there's no settlement in the late Bronze Age, therefore it's mentioned in the book of Joshua is problematic. And he says, we've got tons of late Bronze Age. It's all right here from the earliest excavations onwards, just that some scholars deny it for some reason. Here's all the evidence, and it goes through it. And so that's a good episode where we kind of touch on it, but we haven't done one specifically focused on Jericho yet.
That's so fascinating. So is your podcast for scholars talking to scholars for other scholars? Is it for normal people? Who's the intended audience?
Yeah, it's meant to be broadly accessible to anyone who's interested in the biblical world, kind of the historical, cultural, archaeological backgrounds to the Bible. And we try to make it accessible so that it's not, oh, hey, Tim, tell me about stratum 18A-C and why it's important for, that might be interesting to some people, but I would say 99% of the people not so much. So we try to make it broadly accessible and exciting for people to listen to. And I've been surprised at just the different kind of types of people who come across and I listen to the podcast. Like, okay, great.
That's cool.
Glad it's reaching a broad audience.
Yeah, awesome. So you also told us when we were onboarding, you went back to school for some seminary experience. Tell us about that and what you're thinking behind that, and where you went. How was that experience?
Yeah, so I'm just finishing up a kind of second master's degree through Ashland Theological Seminary.
Nice.
And the whole thinking was that, through my previous training and everything I've got to experience, never did I actually have the time or really even the need to learn biblical Greek. All my other kind of ancient languages were ancient Near Eastern languages. And I kind of picked it up a little bit on the way, kind of could fudge my way through it a bit. But I said, I really want to learn this and expand my kind of knowledge into the New Testament and even church history so that I have a really full scope of the ancient world, of the history of the church, of the Bible. And one thinking was, if I want to, teach at a seminary or teach churches or even just teach interested people in general, there has to be, I think, an aspect of this broad chronological development of thought, of tradition, of understanding. And it's one thing to have it that goes all the way back into the ancient Near East, the Old Testament, Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
But then, what's taking place in the New Testament, what's taking place in church history, and so many of the things that we know today, or at least a lot of the beliefs in the church today, really stem from much later periods. And so how do you then get from the biblical original to those the forms and formulations we find later on? And that was what I wanted to delve into. And it's been a fantastic experience to allow me to do that and to kind of create this running narrative within my own mind of understanding to hopefully then present it and help teach others.
Man, that's cool. That's really cool. So, tell us about your family real quick.
Yeah, so I got married and I've got 3 kids, so 3 daughters. So I'm pretty well outnumbered here, but I don't mind. That's great. And so 9, 8, and 5. So they keep my wife and I busy. My wife's a social worker, so she loves helping people in a tangible, actual way, whereas I like to think I help people in a, maybe less important way, but I'm trying to teach the Bible, so that's important. Right? Yeah. And the kids, they love activities. They're all active in all kinds of sports and things, and I just love going to watch them. And I try to coach, but my oldest daughter says, "Don't coach me, Dad." I'm like, I played these sports though. I know what I'm talking about. I just want to help you do this. And she's like, no, just leave it alone.
What sports?
Let's see. She does basketball, kung fu, softball. My middle daughter does soccer and kung fu, and the youngest daughter does dance and soccer.
Oh man, I thought you were going to say dance and kung fu.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Come on,
I think she's about old enough to start doing it though.
And she can start now. Yeah.
You're making some.
Any boyfriend that wants to come along, they gotta know they're getting a kung fu girl, and
hit the mat.
They'll have me too. So.
That's a better strategy. I told my daughter that if a boy wants to date you, they have to be able to pin me to the ground. And both of our kids were immediately like, "Oh, you're going to get hurt, Dad," because I get hurt. Everything hurts me. So it's probably better to make her into a murder weapon instead of me have to. Yeah, that's crazy. You're the kind of doctor that doesn't help people, as my kids tell others that they're not too impressed. So. Man, that's awesome, Kyle. Well, that's a whirlwind introductory tour to you. We have spent a ton of time. I feel like we've learned a lot. Can we just point to some of your publications? And they are, you're probably our podcasters audience is probably going to want to replace the refrigerator before they buy one of your books because they're so expensive. But I would like to get to one tool in particular that you were a part of. So. I think our audience and we are able to get some sense of the scope of your scholarly interests and areas of expertise. Super impressive. You wrote about Hezekiah's preparations for rebellion in your dissertation. You have also edited some volumes and then written some essays that I think maybe are representative of what you did. You wrote an essay in Jerusalem in the First Temple period. from Routledge. Routledge does great work, but this book is on sale for $142 online. Did you at least get a copy of that for
I
writing
got a
it?
copy, and then I think.
Are you trying to sell it for $142 on Amazon? Is that you? Okay.
Oh, I don't know. I
Sell
can't
it for,
say.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. And then this Registers and Modes of Communication in the Ancient Near East. That's a volume that you edited. Help a normal person understand what in the wide world of sports is going on there.
Yeah, so that volume came out of a conference that I kind of helped co-coordinate in Sydney, and it was about the way people communicated in the past and the way that we as modern interpreters understand them to communicate today. And so it's not only about kind of a horizontal spread of how people communicated with each other in antiquity, but then it's that kind of vertical of, well, how then do we make sense and connect to them in a meaningful way? And it was a nice collection of different essays that covered everything from the Old Babylonian period up through the Persian period, and looking at different aspects. What do translators do? What was their function in the ancient world? How does archaeoastronomy actually factor into the conceptual worldview and how it communicates kind of across cultures? It was a lot of fun. It allowed me to get into kind of something called systemic functional linguistics, which was how people communicate. Yeah, it just kind of sounds fancy. But it's a super simple concept. The idea is, you create meaning as you communicate within a culture, and so the question is, does language allow you to create meaning in your worldview, or is it the opposite way around, basically? And how are you understanding the things that are around you, and how do you communicate those successfully to people with you? And if somebody's not from your culture, you have to change the way that you actually communicate to help them understand. And this is one of the challenges we have with the ancient world. I mean, none of us are 10th century, 9th century Israelites, unless someone built a time machine and came forward. I don't know. So how do we then understand what they're trying to say in their text to each other, and how do we then appropriate it for today? We can't just open up the biblical text and say, oh, yeah, well, it says this, this, and this. And it obviously means that this is the case as we know from today. Well, no, that's entirely anachronistic. We're reading our own worldview back into it. And that becomes very
I just take the Bible literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man, that is so fascinating. The table of contents, those essays look amazing. For our Pillar students in our audience, you don't have to pay $180 for this. It's available in our library.
But you can buy it, though, and I think my royalties are still in the negative for that one. It hasn't exactly been on the New York Times bestseller yet. So
it's incredible, though. Incredible. One more here before we get to the one that is moderately affordable. You just recently edited a work on ancient Israel in the Routledge Worlds series. That's $170 down from $250 act now. But this looks just magisterial in its introduction to the Israelite world. And you put this together. Is that was your role, editing and recruiting and collecting and ordering and all?
Yeah.
Tell us about this.
So Routledge came to me and said, we really want to create a volume in this world of series on ancient Israel, and kind of thought, okay, what would be a resource that I, as a student, would have loved to have had to allow me not only access, but then really to go deeper and to see things in a different way. I mean, there's any number of introductory archaeological texts or introductions to the biblical text. My vision for this volume was bring the two together in a methodologically informed way, using the best of the different theories that are appropriate for a given topic, and let's start to ask new questions and see how we can bring out new understanding, both from the archaeology and also as it relates to the culture, the history of ancient Israel, but even then how it allows us to tie that to the text as well. And so had this amazing cast of international scholars that agreed to come on and write their chapters, and I was super pleased with it. And it will come out in paperback and be affordable for real people at some point in time. But it was really this volume, though. There's a more introductory type volume, which I think we'll talk about in just a moment. This one was meant as like the next step. So you're interested, you're fascinated, let's go a bit deeper. And also let's ask these questions and look at these topics that you're not going to come across in any other kind of textbook or any other kind of standard treatment of the archaeology or the biblical text. And so it really tried to sit and think about what are topics that nobody's talking about that are really fascinating that we can actually talk about and that would be really important.
Oh, yeah, that's incredible. Guys, I don't know if y'all have had a chance to click on the link and look at these essays. Fantastic. It really is just an unbelievable service to the academy and to the students
and it's super thick, so it's a really nice paperweight. So if you live in a windy area and you got it, it'll hold papers down pretty well. Oh,
man. Yeah, I would imagine it's got to be almost 1,000 pages probably. It's got to be a big old thing.
Something close to that.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's really cool, though. So neat that you were kind of given a green light to really think of. And I get what you're saying. I appreciate that you put together a resource that you wish we would have had as students. And I feel like a lot of these things, people almost forgot what it's like to be dum-dums because they've been doing it for, so long. But the topic list just looks incredible and useful.
And that was one of the things that I communicated or tried to communicate along with my co-editor, George Pierce, to all the authors. Is like, okay, make this accessible. You can get deep into the weeds along the way, but make it accessible at the same time. And across the board, I think they all did a fantastic job of striking that balance.
Really, really cool. All of these books that we've been talking about, again, for Pillar students, they're in the library. You should check them out and get a sense, a little more detailed sense of what Dr. Keimer is thinking like and writes like, and how fun it's going to be to learn from him. So, okay, last thing here. It looks like we probably need to wrap up. We have gone long, but this has been fascinating. The more introductory volume that you talked about here, Behind the Scenes of the Old Testament, seems more for almost undergraduate or seminary level introductory, but quite comprehensive, thorough introduction to the Old Testament world. You were a part of that. Give us a little more on that tool.
Yeah, I think, like you just said, it's this incredible introduction that covers, I think, has an amazing breadth of topics from the kind of the archaeological sequencing to various topics that are going to help you understand the Bible in its world and kind of look behind the scenes. Obviously, that's the name of the text.
Yeah.
But it's such an important, I think, asset to present all this material for, again, archaeologists, historians, textual scholars. It kind of brings everything together. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to write one of the chapters in there. So I wrote one on Sennacherib's invasion in 701 and kind of the impact that had on biblical thinking. And that was a fun topic to deal with.
It was fun to read, by the way. I read it before this. I told you that, but really, really interesting. Like you say, accessible, fun to learn from. Your writing and every other essay that I've read in this volume, and immediate applicational concepts and ideas. You really see the value of background and contextual study. So for you, maybe just give us a little bit. I thought it was really fascinated to hear about Assyrian imperial ideology and language that was used to describe Sennacherib's conquests and successes that found its way into the language of the prophets. Maybe just give us a little nugget there from that. I thought that was really a cool thing to learn from you.
Yeah. Well, one of the kind of clearest cases is in the book of Isaiah. And it seems that Isaiah seems to the actual 8th century prophet living in Jerusalem seems to have been aware enough of this Assyrian propaganda and kind of cultural milieu, even kind of literary devices. And there have been many studies on this that highlight it in more detail than I go into in the book. But he uses that to then kind of turn it on its head and twist around Assyrian royal propaganda that's all about the king, the Melamu of the king, this glorious radiance of the king, kind of as the representative Asher coming and bringing order, so to speak, to the world by dominating everyone. And Isaiah takes that language, that propaganda, and says, actually, that king isn't the real kind of superhero of the universe. Our God is, and he's the one that actually created everything, maintains everything. It's his glory that kind of dominates everything. And if we are in proper relationship to him, things are going to go well. And part of the kind of conversation that factors into Isaiah's discussion and utilization of this is what we call Zion theology, and the idea that Jerusalem, right, cannot be conquered because this is where, you know, God's temple is. This is where he dwells himself. And Isaiah does some interesting things with that, where it's, on the one hand, seems very positive to this kind of theology. It's like, yes, this is where God is, but it's not without cost. Like, you don't just do whatever you want, live however you want, and you're going to, you know, keep the status quo. Like, there is a practical calling and response that you need to have if this situation is going to stay the same, if God is going to continue to allow you to be in Jerusalem or in the land, which, you know, that even comes back to the story of Deuteronomy. It's not without contingency, or it's not without, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't just get a free pass. Like, if you don't actually keep your end of the bargain and honor God in the appropriate way, bye-bye, you get kicked out.
Yep. Vomit it out. As the yeah. Oh, man. Donnelly.
So Sennacherib's downfall and his two sons killing him. What's the point there? I mean, there's a reason behind that.
Good question. You know, it's funny. I actually just interviewed another scholar. He did a recent book on Sennacherib and the War of 1812, and looking at parallels between how you claim victory from military campaigns and what victory actually looks like. And one of the case study is Sennacherib and Hezekiah. So in the biblical text, you know, you get a couple different tellings, but in general, Israel wins, or Judah wins, Hezekiah wins, God wins, the Assyrian army is wiped out. And the punishment for kind of coming up against the God of Israel is that Sennacherib, the king, is killed by his own sons. Right? The biblical text will say, kind of present the picture that this all unfolds, boom, 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 back to back to back, as soon as Sennacherib leaves Judah without conquering Jerusalem or removing Hezekiah from the throne. He goes back home and his sons murder him because he was unsuccessful and kind of tested the God. What we know from Assyrian sources, however, is that this event of the sons murdering Sennacherib didn't happen for 20 years. And so the biblical author portrays the story in a specific way to move forward the biblical writer's agenda and presenting of how things unfolded and how they understand these events take place. Whereas if you look at the Assyrian records, they're going to claim victory over Judah because they destroyed most of the cities in the kingdom, which we actually see in the archaeology.
26.
They were able to exact tribute, which the Bible admits as well, and they're able to open up all the trade routes. Does it matter that they removed Hezekiah from his throne or took Jerusalem? Yeah, maybe it would have, but not in the way they tell their version of the story. They're more interested in making sure you know that Sennacherib is this awesome king, and he successfully accomplished the goal he set out to accomplish.
Oh, man. That's so fascinating. There's so much there. That's a good question. Thanks, Donnell. We might need to wrap up here. It's coming on 45 minutes of your time that we've taken up. It has felt like 10, though. It's been super interesting. So, real quick, let's do a few quick hits. 1-2 word responses. Favorite sports team to cheer for?
Ohio State.
Oh, nasty.
I should say the Ohio State University to get it right.
All right, we're done here. I'm going to rescind your contract. Our spiritual home is Nebraska, right?
Nebraska's okay.
Y'all are the mean big brothers.
I was hoping you weren't going to say Michigan, so I would just quit right now.
Gross. Do you have pets?
No, we do not. A couple stray cats, and my in-law's dog comes over from time to time because my youngest loves to torment him. So, oh wait, I take that back. My middle daughter, we gave her a hamster for her birthday, so we have this creature
that you forgot about. Apparently, it might be dead. Who knows?
It's laying around somewhere.
I forgot. We have a hamster. That's amazing. What's your favorite book of the Bible?
Oh gosh, it's probably a toss-up between Samuel and Isaiah.
Well, that's a punt. Right there. That's what we call that. You favorite child? I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer that.
The one who isn't crying and screaming.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's great. What about favorite spot to bring people to in the Holy Land? As the Lord wills, hopefully we'll get to visit again. What's the aha moment you love?
I think I would say Jerusalem, and specifically the Holy Sepulchre, because in my estimation, this does mark the spot where Jesus' tomb was, where he was crucified, and I think to have this connection and to see not only the tomb itself when you go into the cenacle, but then also the subsequent evolutions of the architecture over this, from early pilgrims leaving graffiti to Constantine's foundation still left there, to the Crusader elements, to the more modern renovations. It's all there. And I think it just gives this tangible element to this actually took place. Here's a real place. It's right here.
All right. Let's change the channels for one last question. Beef or chicken enchiladas?
Beef. Yeah.
Well, that was real quick. Okay.
Not even easy. Beef. I always beef, or pork sometimes.
All right. Well, we should wrap it up on that very somber note that chicken has totally been denied a place in your house. Hamsters are okay, though. So, yeah. Listen, neither here nor there, but I spent a couple years in Germany, and guinea pigs were huge there. They were like dogs, guinea pigs everywhere. For pets. Now, of course, I was 12 when this.
I thought you meant for eating. I was like, I didn't realize that they.
Well, hold on. I'm not done with my story yet.
Okay.
When they die, a lot of them would just eat their guinea pigs. So, anyway,
waste not,
can
want
we
not.
push? Can we push the envelope for about a second or two? I am interested in why you are excited about teaching at Pillar.
That's good, Donnell. That's good.
Good question. I think for me, we can talk about the archaeology, the history, the context, even the biblical text till we're blue in the face. But it's the big questions of, so what? And why does it matter? And how does it have meaning for us today? And in a secular institution, you don't necessarily get to move into those kind of questions. Whereas in a seminary, you do. That's the whole point of making sense of all this material to say, so what? Why is this important? Why do we want to know these things? Because the answer is because there's meaning there, and it helps us to ground ourselves in this historical tradition, not only of the church, but of humanity, and allows us to see that we're not just creating things out of blind faith. These things took place. Like, there's real places, real people, real events, real times that are kind of charting out this thing that we believe in. And in a seminary context, we get to talk all about that and pull the picture together. And I think Pillar is the approach that is taken here is such a fantastic one, because you start with the context. And you don't start with systematic theology or something else, which, all those things have their place. But if you don't have the context, you don't have the foundations or the root, whatever's growing out of that's going to be dead.
Well said.
Well, Donnell is the adult in the room here as the senior executive, making sure we end on an edifying note. So
don't end with hamsters and guinea pigs.
Thanks, Donnell, for bringing us a little sanity back to the conversation. We should definitely wrap up, though. Thanks so much, Kyle, for your time. We're delighted to get to spend this time with you and introduce our audience to you. Thank you so much for also being willing to teach with us.
My pleasure. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're pumped. And Donnell and Daniel, thanks as well for your time and your input here.
If you want to hear more from Dr. Keimer, make sure you apply to Pillar Seminary.
Oh, that's a good way to end. Yes, absolutely. Drs. Parker and Keimer are ready to teach you. So come on. There's still time to sign up for the fall. We're starting in August, so it's a little sooner. But yeah, come study with these scholars. It'd be really fun. All right. I think that'll just about do it. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time. You may or may not know that we exist entirely from two different revenue streams. One is tuition revenue, and the other is from donations from supporters, generous supporters like many of you. We could not do what we do, including this podcast, which is a ministry of Pillar Seminary, without your generous support. We would ask you to prayerfully consider, if you haven't already, joining us, partnering with us, and supporting the work and the ministry that we do here in all of its forms at Pillar Seminary. You can find out more, and you can go online to give at pillarseminary.org/give.
Thanks Thanks for listening to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Please visit us on the web at pillarseminary.org to find out more about our academic degree programs and non-credit learning opportunities. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and podcasting platforms. Thanks again for listening.